Hi everyone, I'm here to introduce the topic of our group presentation, psychedelics. We have named the presentation the Psychedelic Renaissance because of the rise in popularity of psychedelic research and the opportunities they may offer for health, especially mental health. This field of research is particularly relevant to psychology given its links to cognition, emotion, and perception, amongst others. Psychedelics were considered a taboo for decades, inciting an interruption of research into them, but today research has restarted with more interest than before, and we are here today to delve into the topic. This part of the presentation aims to give you a broad understanding of the term psychedelic, the basics of their functioning in the brain, but also an understanding of the current field of psychedelics, research, and research methods. Overall, you should come out of it with a solid understanding of what psychedelics and the psychedelic renaissance are. So, to begin, what are psychedelics? Psychedelics can be defined as powerful psychoactive substances that alter perception and mood and affect numerous cognitive processes. Psychedelics are drugs that act on the mind and our senses in a way that few other drugs have been known to do. They're also known as hallucinogens, but this name suggests the use of these drugs has a purely hallucinatory effect, which is not the case. If we now unpack this definition, we can assert that psychedelics have an effect on our brain, our psyche. The drugs target specific receptors, the 5-HT2A that we'll get into later, in the central nervous system, namely the cerebral cortex. As a consequence, they can influence what we see, with the power to alter our perception, be it visual, auditory, or tactile, as well as our cognition and our emotional responses. Drugs under this category include LSD, mescaline, psilocybin, and DMT, all of which are similar in structure to serotonin neurotransmitters. The etymology of the word psychedelic is also relevant. The term was coined by psychiatrist Humphrey Osmond in 1956 in a letter to Aldous Huxley. Psyche, psyche, comes from ancient Greek meaning soul, and delun means to show or to reveal, therein forming the word psychedelic, or soul revealing. This suggests psychedelics have the power to uncover hidden abilities of the mind, and is in part why the term was not used in the scientific community, as it insinuated psychedelics could be beneficial. I thought it would be helpful to go into a brief history of psychedelics in science. In the 20th century, particularly in the 1950s, researchers like psychologists Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert were beginning to look more deeply into the effects of psychedelics. Leary and Alpert founded the Harvard Psilocybin Project, which sought to explore the effects of psychedelics on consciousness. However, the informal nature of Leary's and Alpert's research led their colleagues to question its scientific merit, seeing as it lacked methodology and safety regulations for participants. On top of this, it is said that the researchers were also on drugs while conducting their experiments. So all credibility for the research was lost, and the two men were fired. In this case, both the controversial nature of psychedelics and the improper execution of their study hindered the collection of reliable data, and therefore restricted the amount of knowledge that could be taken from their study. Nevertheless, although the study failed in many aspects, it may have inspired other researchers in the field of psychiatry and/or pharmacology to take an interest in psychedelics, therein promoting the later discovery of the beneficial impacts of psychedelics in mental disorders. Now, to go into the legal side of things, around the time of Leary's research, so-called hippies in the United States were protesting against the war in Vietnam. These anti-war cries were associated with the consumption of psychedelics and other drugs, and in conjunction with additional social strain, psychedelics were rapidly banned in the U.S. under the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, and this made the study of psychedelics impossible. Under the Controlled Substances Act of 1970, psychedelics are listed as a drug in Schedule 1. Schedules are determined based on a substance's medical use, the potential for abuse, addiction, and harmfulness. Schedule 1 contains all substances regarded as dangerous, possibly addictive, and are not permitted for use in medicine. Now, how did this affect research? In the UK, use and distribution of psychedelics, or psychoactive substances, is also illegal. Today, in order to enable research into psychedelics in the United States and United Kingdom, approval must be sought from the Federal Drug Enforcement Administration and the Home Office, respectively. This process is, however, said to be expensive and lengthy, and therefore limits the amount of research opportunities that exist. So, now that we have some background knowledge on psychedelic research, we can explore the basics of their functioning. These are, 5-HT2A receptors. They're serotonin receptors, specifically those that bind to psychedelics. Psychedelics are generally believed to be agonists or partial agonists to serotonin 5-hydroxytryptamine 2A receptors. This means that their binding to a serotonin receptor has the same effect that serotonin would have. These receptors are G-protein coupled, a mechanism that we'll specify later in the presentation, and drugs acting on these receptors have been shown to have antipsychotic, antidepressant, and anxiolytic properties. So now we can look into serotonin. Serotonin has a wide range of functions in the cardiovascular, pulmonary, gastrointestinal, and genitourinary systems, as well as the central nervous system. New functions of serotonin continue to emerge, but it is most relevant to psychedelic use because of its behavioral effects. Serotonin neurons from the brainstem branch into many regions. These include the cortical, limbic, midbrain, and hindbrain regions. Serotonin is known to act on mood, perception, memory, and attention, among others, which explains why the use of psychedelics has such an extensive impact on behavior. On this illustration here, we can see the pathways of serotonin acting through the sensory motor, the default mode network, and the salience networks. So the first is important in the perception of our surroundings, while the default mode network is a group of brain regions that are active when one is not engaged in a specific activity. So while under the influence of psychedelics, this network is particularly active and has been shown to increase our introspection, inducing altered states of consciousness. The salience network enables the detection of stimuli that require our attention. Findings on psychedelic impacts on attention, which is a part of general cognition, vary, but yeah. So the illustration on the bottom here illustrates how similar the psychedelics are, so psilocybin, DMT, LSD, are to the structure of serotonin here, allowing them to bind to the same 5-HT2A receptors. Okay, so now we can look into the methods used to study psychedelics in research. The effects of psychedelics in humans can be separated into two categories, the subjective experience and the physiological responses. The physiological responses can be separated into brain, with neuroimaging techniques, or the body, but we'll be focusing on the brain. The subjective experience is often measured by questionnaires or interviews. The questionnaire most widely used to assess altered states of consciousness is the Altered Mental States Questionnaire, also known as the OAV scales, which has recently been reviewed and now comprises of 11 factors. These allow the participant to give more detailed measures of their experience in retrospect, on top of being a psychometric measure that can be used to compare results between participants, studies, or even experimental settings. Indeed, it has been shown that set and setting play a big role in the participant's experience, which is extremely important for studies as it can have a significant impact on their outcomes, especially regarding the subjective experience. Another questionnaire that is used is the hallucinogen rating scale, which is based on 6 categories, but there are many more. So how are physiological responses measured? The physiological responses to psychedelics have been widely studied since the beginning of the psychedelic renaissance using neuroimaging techniques. In the 2017 study by Carhart et al., the effects of the psychedelic psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression were measured using functional magnetic resonance imaging, or fMRI. The study showed that a decrease in depressive symptoms could be observed after treatment, which was correlated on the fMRI with decreased cerebral blood flow. Blood oxygen level dependent fMRIs can enable the visualization of blood flow here within the brain. They can be useful in trying to identify the parts of the brain that are active during the performance of a task. In the study of psychedelics, they can reveal what section of the brain might be stimulated by drugs. And this can also be found using arterial spin labeling with fMRIs, which is a different technique. Another method that can be used is magnetoencephalography, or MEG, which enables the measurement of the magnetic field generated by the electrical activity of neurons. This method is more effective than electroencephalography, which detects the brain's electrical activity. This is because it has higher accuracy in locating areas of brain activity and better ability to identify higher frequencies. In a 2013 study, MEG recordings were made before and after intravenous infusion of psilocybin. Researchers observed a broadband desynchronization of cortical oscillatory rhythms and decreased brain network integrity. This means that the normal patterns of neural activity experienced desynchronization in the cortex, as a result of which the brain functioned less effectively. And this might be the source of many subjective effects of psychedelics. The use of positron electron tomography is also very common in psychedelic studies. Today, researchers in a range of fields like psychiatry, psychology, and neuropharmacology seek to better understand how psychedelic drug-assisted psychotherapy may offer treatment opportunities, especially as an alternative in treatment-resistant mental disorders. And this will be explored further in a later part of the presentation. And psychedelics have a long history, spanning from ancient Greece to ancient India to 14th century Central America and the Amazon, all the way to modern times. The anthropological and sociocultural implications of psychedelics will be explored in the following part of the presentation. Thank you.